Okay, I think we can get started. As we left off, told you we'd begin with this. Frida Kahlo, the two Fridas. And the last time we were here, I was talking to you about surrealism. And so whether or not it was automatic drawing generated or dreamscape generated, one of the main strategies for artists of this time was to look inward, not outward. Does that make sense to you? I mean, if you're thinking about your dreams, that's it, that's in your deepest recesses of your mind. If you're generating automatic drawing, you're looking inward. This is from, again, deep inside your consciousness. And so I told you too that the surrealists fled World War II and they washed up, if you will, in America. And so they looked around and they had a pretty firm belief that looking inward and generating art from the subconscious mind was really truly the way art should be. They were firm believers in surrealism. And when they came upon Frida Kahlo, many of them just fell in love with her work. Because if you've seen Frida Kahlo's work, the whole body of work, you'll find out that it's very autobiographical. And autobiographical is yet another way of looking inward, making art about yourself. And she did this in a most unconventional way. And this is a really good example of that, the two Fridas. And you can see that it is her, she is depicted twice in this painting. And you see there is this line here. I want to see who's here. Wes, okay, good. Want to see that these two Fridas are connected by blood, and they have tubing from one to the other. And on the end of this tubing is, I forgot what you call those things. Yeah, it's a surgical instrument. It's used to, it's more or less a clamp. And so that's what she's got here. Now, let me tell you about the autobiographical aspects of this. Frida, in her own way, felt like she was living two lives. She was living the life of an artist, her true self. She was a painter and a great artist. And secondly, she was seen as the artist wife. This guy here, Diego Rivera, was her husband. And he was recognized in his time as one of the great artists of the era. And he was, this is in the fresco in the Palacio Nacional, which is really the kind of like the White House, the National Palace in Mexico City. He's got murals in Rockefeller Center. He's got murals in Detroit and all over North America. He was big time. A lot of people have since criticized his work because he was sort of a leftist in his politics. As a matter of fact, he was so leftist that, how should I, let me start this story. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, it was led by Vladimir Lenin. We know who he is, Leningrad. He's great leader of the Soviet Union, and his right-hand person, his deputy, was a guy named Leon Trotsky. And in the late 1920s, there was a power struggle when Lenin died. And Joseph Stalin rose to power and became this dictator of the Soviet Union. And Stalin killed a lot of people. He was truly a dictator, and he killed all of his enemies, except Leon Trotsky, and he got out of the country and he went to Mexico. And guess where he stayed? He stayed with Diego and Frida. He was there he was a house guest of theirs. And in 1940, to add a little more to the story, Leon Trotsky was killed in 1940 by agents from the Soviet Union. They tracked him down and they killed him. They chopped it. It was a gruesome killing. They put an axe to his head while he was sleeping. Boom. Anyway, why did I bring that up? Because Diego Rivera was worldwide famous. You know, he had people from all over the world in his orbit. And to some extent, because of the norms, the standards, the mores of the day, Frida was expected to be kind of the wifey, if you will. And she was an artist. And so those are the two Fridas. And they're connected by the heart. And you see here, there she is. She's the bride, and she is her own person. On this end of the tube, she's got, I forgot what they call something seps. Anyway, the blood. And on this end is this little, it's a little portrait. Diego Rivera and Frida. And they're connected. Their heart is connected. She is the two people. And so that is autobiographical. It's describing how she had this kind of split in what people expected of her. This is not the only autobiographical piece, by the way. She had a very interesting story that came to light. She died in 1954, by the way. But as a young girl, she was in a school bus accident and broke her back. And she spent much time in the hospital. undergoing surgeries. I mean, just over and over again. She had a lot of health problems, but she was a great painter. And all of her paintings, oh, I mean, nearly everything is autobiographical. She's got one, it's kind of got a X-ray shot, kind of like how the heart, you can see that, but it shows her back, and it's a Greek column from Greek architecture, except for it's broken in a bunch of pieces, and it's called the broken column. And it's really about how she had this accident as a child and had never really fully recovered. And so to give you an idea of how important Frida Kahlo is, there was a movie made about her 20-some years ago, 30 years ago now. Selma Hayek played Frida Kahlo, and it's a pretty good movie. It's pretty accurate. And you guys know Madonna, singer, actress. She is an avid fan of Frida Kahlo. She's collected a lot of Frida Kahlo works. She spent a lot of money. And she wanted to play Frida Kahlo in the movie. Didn't happen. She didn't get the role. But at any rate, yeah, I think that it points to how popular, how important she is, even to this day. And so you got to kind of look at her work through her autobiography, because these are really autobiographical paintings. And she has other ones about herself and nature. She had a pet monkey, and he's on her shoulder, and all of this jungle flora and stuff. Just beautiful paintings. Anyway, that's Frida Kahlo. And this guy here, Alfred Stieglitz, and we're looking at photography here. The steerage. What's a steerage? Where you put cows, the steers. Now, a steerage, this is this part down here. And this is a time when there were boatloads of immigrants coming from Europe to the United States. It was the great immigration from Europe. They all mostly ended up at Ellis Island in New York, and most of them were poor. And steerage is where the poor people travel. It was just this big place. It was kind of dark and smelly, and not much accommodations up on deck, and everything above deck was first class. They had restaurants and things. Have you ever seen the movie Titanic? See, I'm so old. I remember movies from the mid-90s. Anyway, Leonardo DiCaprio's character is from steerage. Kate Winslet's character is from first class. It's a romance wrapped around a major tragedy. The boat sank and 1,500 people died, but but steerage, this is realism. This goes back to, if I could show you an equivalent, the first painting we saw here, John Sloan. This is like ordinary people. They're in New York City. I mean, these people are not poor, but oftentimes the 8 and the Ashcan School, they depicted a lot of real people, poor people, people with their laundry hanging out of the windows and things. And so back to the idea American scene painting and photography. Alfred Stieglitz holds another important part in American art history. He was a photographer himself. He married Georgia O'Keeffe, who becomes a great American artist. And also, he was very much responsible for bringing a lot of the European ideas over to America. Even if they didn't take hold, he was there trying to show another generation of artists what was going on in Europe. I told you about the Armory Show of 1913. Teddy Roosevelt commented on Marcel Duchamp's nude descending staircase. This looks like an explosion in a shingle factory. That was the kind of reaction that most European Cubists and post-impressionist art had. But he was an early proponent of modernism in the US. So he's kind of got a double place, a triple place if you count Georgia O'Keeffe, Armory Show, and his own work as a photographer. And here is another photograph. And what Stieglitz does gets picked up by a whole generation of photographers. A whole generation of photographers in America that start to look at photography as an art form. What I've shown you to date really at the time wasn't considered to be art quite so much. The dead soldiers of the Civil War, I showed you Edward Muybridge, The Galloping Horse, photography as science, the camera as a scientific instrument. Well, this is says equivalent. Clouds, sky, sun, done on this acute diagonal. It's almost like an abstract painting, if you will. And there's, in a lot of ways, that is the subject matter, and it's not like people, places, and events. This is nature. And so there is this focus on nature. Edward Weston, he's part of that next generation. Pepper, number 30, using contrast, this light and dark, this smooth gradation, gelatin silver print. Edward Weston is at the Center for Creative Photography because he's another early, almost abstract kind of photographer. He's zooming in on the pepper, but it becomes something else. It becomes an abstract design, kind of like this. And so I got another Edward Weston here too, nude, platinum. And there is the nude. But again, it's so zeroed in and so cropped. By that, I mean cut off all the way around, that this too becomes sort of like an abstract painting. In the truest sense of the word, abstract. You take what you want and you leave the rest. Abstract photography. And that is looking, as I said, at photography as a legitimate art form. This may seem kind of strange 100 years later because we readily accept photography as art. But at the time, it was still quite a serious debate. And Dorothea Lange, migrant mother, Nimpomo Valley, California. And so this is not abstract photography like I've just shown you. This is a whole different kind of thing. This is like out of American scene painting. And let me fill in a little background. This is in 1935. What happened in the US in the 1930s? Kaylee. Yes, ma'am. The Great Depression. And so what we had were millions of people out of work. We had, this is a migrant mother. What we had in a lot of ways, there were a lot of things that exacerbated the fall, the collapse of the economy. And one of them was the Dust Bowl, because they didn't understand good soil management and stuff. And so anyway, their farms were rendered pretty much useless. And a lot of people from the Midwest, and especially places like Oklahoma, they traveled to California. That was the migrant part of this, Nimpomo Valley. And what's happening in California is that California was unaffected by Dust Bowl, environmental collapse, if you will. And so there's a lot of literature, a lot of paintings, a lot of recorded history, and a lot of photography, and especially Dorothea Lange. And she documented this time, this migration. They had people like John Steinbeck writing about the Okies, Grapes of Wrath, for example, great novel. And the geese are backing me up here. They know. Anyway, bottom line, what happens in the 1930s, I got to add this onto this work of art. As the economy collapsed, the government stepped in, the United States government, and they implemented what was called the New Deal program. Okay, I'm seeing it yet. You know history. Art and history. Bottom line is that the New Deal introduced a lot of programs to help people out. Not unlike what just happened during the pandemic, where they did things like they halted all evictions from rental properties, and they gave people money, and they gave them whatever. In the 1930s, the issue was keeping people working. And one of the ways that they did that was called a WPA, Works Project Association or Administration. And they put on the government payroll a lot of artists, photographers like Dorothea Lange, and painters and sculptors. And they did a lot of public works. They did a lot of things, and it kept that artistic community afloat during the Depression. And so they had some stipulations on this, like Dorothea Lange's photography actually ended up going into the Library of Congress because they paid for them. But bottom line is this: it kept a lot of people working, and a lot of people we'll see emerge in the 1940s as painters. They worked through the Depression as WPA artists. But that's what this is, and you can see she's desperate. This photo says everything. This is really, truly a picture that's worth 1,000 words. The mother doesn't know how to feed her kids. Their clothes are ragged. don't know where the next meals come from. Truly desperation, and past and present. We see people at this moment showing up in places like Poland and Hungary and Moldova because of the war. The women with their children, they don't know. They just got to take care of the kids, but it's a terrible situation. Margaret Bork White. I showed you this painting earlier. There, Charles Demuth, My Egypt, and this kind of glorification of industry. And we talked about this and how it's got some of the connection to Cubism and the painting of light. But one thing that happens in Charles Demuth's work is that he paints these factories and these silos and all of this industry without any reference to environmental damage that all of these places produce. So you don't see the soot on the smokestacks or on the walls. You don't see. There are times, there are some Demuth paintings that show a smokestack and the smoke coming out, but the smoke kind of joins with the clouds and it looks harmonious with nature, which in today's world, we know that doesn't work that way. But anyway, you see it's clean, it's huge, it's impressive, it's monumental. And he calls it such, My Egypt. And then we'll go to Margaret Bork White, another photographer, Fort Peck Dam, Montana, 1936. Well, this ties into the last slide from Dorothea Lange. Margaret Bork White was a WPA photographer too. And what she has here is a newly completed dam built for two reasons: flood control and hydroelectric power. But you see this is clean. It looks like the Valley of the Kings, the way it's portrayed. This looks like this is monumental. And it's photographed to look exactly that way. Now, we'll give another movie reference, and I'm not sure you guys seen this either. Oh, brother, where art thou? Coen Brothers. Anyway.
The Odyssey.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's a retelling of the Odyssey in the 1930s in the South in the US. Exactly. But at the end, they finished the dam. That was the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, and they built a lot of dams along the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers like this. And at the end of this movie, they all get flooded because the dam is put in place and it creates a big lake. And you see all of this pomade floating around it. Bottom line, though, we have WPA projects here. They're still around. Bagnell Dam, Lake of the Ozarks, WPA, Bagnell Dam. Could have been Margaret Bork White subject. Made the Lake of the Ozarks. Tennessee Valley Authority gave electricity to much of Tennessee and Kentucky and parts of Appalachia. Anyway, it's all portrayed as clean and monumental. And so we're shifting gears again. This is really quite a run through that the textbook gives you, but this is on a completely different subject. I showed you Marcel Duchamp's Dada piece, Fountain by R. Mudd, 1917. One of the people that collaborated with and was a friend of Marcel Duchamp was this guy, Man Ray. And he was an artist, he was a photographer, and he was a sculptor too. And what he has here is a painted flat iron with a row of 13 tacks glued to the bottom. Now think about that. I showed you Merritt Oppenheim's fur-covered cup. And so she took a place setting, something you may have tea in in another occasion and another time and place, but it's all covered with rabbit fur. Negate the purpose, surrealism, impossibilities. This is something like that. And the idea of a flat iron, you probably wouldn't know about that. That's way too ancient. But this is like a big heavy piece of metal. And before permanent press and all the modern day synthetic fabrics, ironing clothes was like what you did. Clothes were primarily made of cotton, and when you washed them, they dried and they'd be wrinkly. And you'd iron them. And still today, some people iron clothes, but not so much. This kind of iron was, how it worked was that you would put this on your wood burning stove or the stove in your kitchen and heat it up. You didn't plug it in, and they weren't that sophisticated. So you'd heat this thing up and iron your clothes. By gluing tacks onto the bottom of it, it negates the purpose, much like the fur-covered cup. And so it's kind of Dada, it's kind of surrealism, but it's Man Ray, American artist, and following some of the trends of European art. How many of you guys watch SpongeBob? Am I getting closer? Barnacle Boy, who's the villain on that? Man Ray, just like this. You see people like that do things like The Simpsons, Matt Groening, and SpongeBob. Who does SpongeBob? Anyway, these people go to art school. And so you see these little hints of things kind of pop up, you know, and Man Ray, the villain, Barnacle Boy, what's his partner? Mermaid Man, yes. And the villain is Man Ray. Anyway, just say it. You see a lot of Simpsons references to artists like this too. Alexander Calder, Lobster Trap and Fish Tail. This is the lobster trap. And what this is, it kind of comes out of that surrealist Dada movement too. But Calder is the guy who, for all intents and purposes, invents the mobile, the hanging sculpture. It hangs and it blows around according to the air currents in the environment. We have mobiles all the time now. They hang up from babies' cribs and stuff. But back in the 1930s, this was kind of a new idea. And it was doing something that sculpture had not done before. That was move. Sculpture, by definition, was static. It was firm. It was in place. This move. How could this be sculpture? and it's not fixed to the ground. And depending on the environment, how you see this and how the shadows are cast will be different. Calder made a very famous work, as I'm talking about Einstein and Dali. Calder made this work called The Universe, and it was kind of like this. It was a lot more complex. And Einstein was fascinated by this Calder piece. And somebody had calculated that the way it was set up, it would take about 45 minutes for this thing to completely rotate so you could see all aspects of it. Maybe coincidentally, maybe not coincidentally, when Einstein saw it, he thought it was genius, and he looked at it for, you guessed it, 45 minutes. Little sidebar of art history. Architecture, what we get in the US, taller, bigger, Art Deco, Chrysler Building. For a brief time, it was the tallest building in the world. About 4 blocks from here, they built the Empire State Building, which eclipsed the Chrysler Building. But this is kind of the granddaddy of big, tall skyscrapers. This one's a lot more decorative too. You can see the Art Deco motif on the upper reaches of this and the spire. And over here, gargoyles around the perimeter. And this building, you know, once you know about it, you'll see this in a lot of films too. And especially this level with gargoyles of it. But anyway, bottom line, this is what happens with American architecture. Up. Monumental. Here's another aspect of American architecture, and this is called a prairie style architecture, where things are low and they're spread out. Prairie style. And so this is the Roby House from Chicago. Frank Lloyd Wright, probably one of the more prominent architects of the US of the day. And guess what? He's from the Midwest too. He had a place called Taliesin, his home and studio in Wisconsin. And he made these, he built these, designed these houses. And they're all over the Midwest. They're in Chicago, there are some in St. Louis, by the way, and in Iowa and in Wisconsin. He was kind of a regionalist that way. And he also designed in 1959 the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. But that's a whole other thing. This is prairie style. And you see everything, structures above or below second level. So it's only 2, but it's more flattened out. So we got 2 different things. We got up and we got spread out. But this is more domestic. This is corporate. Kaufman House in Pennsylvania. And it's called Falling Water because you see what he's done. He's built this over a creek. This is actually, this photo was taken in the wintertime. How do you know? Well, there's no leaves on the trees. And the creek is frozen. This waterfall is icicles. Just saying. But again, this idea of layers and spreading it out and this kind of low stacked idea, prairie style. And that's what happened in American art in the teens, 20s, and 30s. And so that kind of brings us to another chapter. And let me make sure I got the right share. Looks that way. Modernism and postmodernism. So let me give you a little bit of background here. I talked to you guys about how European artists came to America. Second World War. That shifted the balance. That shifted the center, if you will, of art, of high art, the art world of advanced art, moved from Paris to New York City. And in part, a surrealist helped in that transition. And in part, art in Europe did not go away, but it kind of took a different turn, at least for a while. And the European art that happened like post-war was stuff like this. Alberto Giacometti, man pointing. And you can see this is a sculptor, it's a man. And it's kind of like Brancusi in the fact that it's very reductive, doesn't really have much, very thin. But here's the key. Expressionism. Textbook definition, talked about this before. You remember what I said? Shape, form, color, distorted for emotional effect. That's what's happening here. And a lot of this kind of fits into some of the philosophy of post-war Europe, especially existentialism and the idea that that man was kind of just a small part, kind of weak, kind of frail, kind of imperfect. So anyway, this is the essence, as we were talking about Brancusi. And this fit quite nicely into existentialist philosophy, but it is truly expressionism. And I got some more expressionism because that is really what happens in Europe. Of course, you would expect that. They just hosted the most devastating war of human history. And so, yeah, this Francis Bacon, Englishman, we got an Italian, Giacometti, Englishman, Francis Bacon. And here, you know, he puts all of these images together, and it's really quite disturbing, if you will. This is like so full of symbolism, so rich in symbolism. It's kind of hard to look at, but what's this stuff here? Kind of arms. It's meat hanging from meat hooks. And so he does that. He takes, and so what, you know, like I said, they just went through World War II. There's a lot of dead bodies and, you know, so we're making that connection. And one of the things that Bacon goes after is voices of authority. And here it is, this person, a voice of authority. And sometimes these authority figures are clergy, to be sure. They'll put a bishop or someone in there, in the throne, so to speak, but covered by an umbrella and in the darkness. And you see the way that that face is painted is almost monstrous. It's ugly. It's very disturbing. Some more sides of beef here. Gestural painting, line, shape, color, distorted for maximum emotional effect. That is Francis Bacon. That's what he does. That's what Giacometti does. And here's another Francis Bacon figure with meat. And here we got the sides of beef. And here he is in a throne. This is really kind of a recurring theme for Francis Bacon. He'll move on and do paintings about an operating table, which are really kind of gruesome, of human beings getting kind of sliced and diced like this too. But check this out. Distorted for maximum emotional effect. And you can trace this kind of art all the way back to whom? Edward Munch, The Scream. So this expressionism makes a resurgence in Europe. It becomes basically what goes on in Europe at the time. And another person here, Jean Dubuffet. And let me zoom in on part of this too. And he's a Frenchman. And he does a lot of things that are pretty much expressionistic too. But he has another idea that he entertains. And that is children's art and art of uneducated people. And art of the insane. And he does a lot of research. He looks at the art of people declared, and he'd go to sanitariums and find drawings from the people who were inmates at those asylums. And he looked at children's art, and basically he thought that kind of expression was much truer than the kind of expression that you get in art from people who are trained, quote, trained to produce art in a particular way. And so this is expressionism, but he's trying to find the roots, the inner workings of expressionism too. So that is Dubuffet, and you see there's another figure up here too. And here. And all of this stuff. Drawings from the insane, children's drawings, art of the unschooled. And he felt very strongly about this too. He wrote extensively about his work. And so anyway, expressionism, just another take on that. Gerhard Richter, Townscape Paris. There's no color in this. It's truly black and white, but it is oil on canvas, and it is distorted for emotional effect. Now, Gerhard Richter is an artist whose career takes many twists and turns. There's a lot of Gerhard Richter's work in the St. Louis Art Museum. And it's not like this. And he goes from painting expressionism to painting abstract expressionism to painting photographically. He kind of hits a lot of the major themes in the development of Western modernism. So, but this is an expressive painting. And so that's Europe. Abstract expressionism is American. And as I said just a few minutes ago, the center of the artwork of the art world came to New York, and it stayed there. Actually, in a lot of people's minds, it's still the Mecca of artistic creation. But I don't want to debate that right now, but I think that you can say that in the 1940s and 50s, everyone was looking to America for new ideas. And so Arshil Gorky, Garden in Sochi. How do you think this was put together? Mhm. Well, yeah, it looks like that I think that Gorky himself would say that he was employing automatic techniques, kind of the same thing I was talking about with Moreau. And when I told you a moment ago about those surrealists that came over to the US and they really looked around and saw what was going on. And they elevated a number of artists, and Frida Kahlo was one of them. Wilfredo Lam was one of them, and Arshil Gorky was another, because they recognized the automatic techniques. And this is kind of like a Miro, where you do automatism and you draw it out and paint it, and you generate it from the subconscious mind. And so anyway, Gorky enjoyed a lot of fame when the surrealists arrived. They said, well, this guy here, he's one of us. I want to add a little comment here too. The surrealists were really convinced of this idea of a universal subconsciousness. And the fact that they found people, artists in the Americas that were doing some of the same things they were doing, that they found as evidence of their theories about universal subconsciousness. How could this happen that these people a half a world away were doing some of the same kinds of things that we've been talking about for 20 years? And so scholars have looked at that, and there's a lot of back and forth about it. But this idea of automatic drawing and automatic painting really starts to take off. And then it leads to this guy. And as Picasso was the king of world art, Jackson Pollock was here to snatch that crown. He wanted to get the title. He wanted the big belt buckle. So he started doing these, what they call drip paintings. And these are pretty large. It's 7.3 by 9.10. So it's like 7 by 10 feet, huge. And it's put together by dripping paint. And that technique is kind of the same as Gorky and Miro, except he's taken the drawing out of it. He's just painting it and drawing it all at the same time. And so there were a lot of critics in New York who were interested in promoting advanced American art. And they saw this as taking the ideas of surrealism and elevating them, taking it all to a new level. And so there was a lot of fanfare around Jackson Pollock. People, general public, not so crazy about it. Art critics loved it. And so here's a picture, Hans Nemuth, Jackson Pollock painting in his studio. See, by this time he had been making enough money and he was able to go out, move out to Long Island, not living in Greenwich Village in a cold water flat anymore. Had his own studio, and Hans Nemuth was kind of a guy that documented abstract expressionism. And I have a film from this guy that he made in 1951 about Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock had been in Life magazine. Another artist that they'd made a high budget Hollywood movie. This is, I don't remember what year this was, about 2000 or so. You can still see this on Netflix, by the way. This is him. Ed Harris as Jackson Pollock. But this is the real thing. And this, the filming of this piece is actually in oh no, here it is. I gotta make sure I got the right share on here. Looks like it. This is the film he made, and I'll let you see Jackson Pollock in his own words as documented by Hans Nemuth. This is advanced counterculture music.
I'm in Springs, East Hampton, Long Island. I was born in Cody, Wyoming, 39 years ago. In New York, I spent 2 years at the Art Students League of Tom Benton.
What
He was a strong personality to react again.
Tom Benton, what he's talking about is Thomas Hart Benton, who, aside from painting murals, did teach at the Art Students League in New York City. Just saying. So
this was in 1929.
they smoked cigarettes back then too.
I don't work in drawings or color sketches. My painting is direct. I usually paint on the floor. I enjoy working on a large canvas. I feel more at home, more at ease in a big area. Having the canvas on the floor, I feel nearer, more of a part of the painting. This way I can walk around it, work from all four sides, and be in the painting. Similar to the Indian fan painters of the West. Sometimes I use a brush, but often prefer using a stick. Sometimes I pour the paint straight out of the can. I like to use a dripping fluid paint. I also use sand, broken glass, pebbles, string, nails, or other foreign matter. out of a need. I want to express my feelings rather than illustrate them. Technique is just a means of arriving at a statement.
Expressing feelings, not illustrating them.
When I'm painting, I have a general notion as to what I am about. I can control the flow of the paint. There is no accident, just as there is no beginning and no end. Sometimes I lose the painting, but I have no fear of changes, of destroying the image. Because the painting has a life of its own, I try to let it live. This is the first time I'm using glass as a medium. I lost contact with my first painting on glass, and I started another one.
That music was anxiety inducing.
Say what?
That music was anxiety inducing.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty intense. I agree with that. You know what? I'm glad you're saying that. Psychic.
You know, if it was like the that music in the background, if she had some-
I think it was the filmmaker's choice. As a matter of fact, in that film, Pollock, he comes back after they filmed this, and he's like really kind of ticked off. He thought it was more of a publicity stunt, but it's part of art history now. Okay, good. We're still got the people at home. The reason I said I thought that was good that you said that you thought it was weird, because I got quiz 5 for you. And it's kind of along those lines. I thought this a few weeks ago, quiz 3, I asked you to, was it quiz 3, quiz 4? I told you to take a look at chapters 28, 29, 30, and tell me about the works that you thought were difficult or unusual, or you had questions about, you remember. Well, that is kind of a prelude to this, because by the time we hit post-war, things are, in terms of European art, in terms of traditional art, as you see, this is really off the rails, if you will. And so here is the question. Why do you think modernist art and architecture alienated the public? And of course, I don't want it until next week. It's available now, due on the 13th, which is a week from today. But I want you to give me a couple of pages on why you think that. And we're going to look at some more work in chapter 31 and 32, hopefully, when we come back on Monday. But I thought this was an appropriate time to ask that question. Not so much a personal reaction, but why do you think the public was alienated by all of this stuff? And I wanted to add one more little comment to Jackson Pollock. And that is that you see how he painted these paintings. You got the cans of paint, he's painting. What he eliminated was the drawing. See, with Miro and Gorky and a lot of these other automatic artists, they would draw and then they would paint it in. So it was like a two-step process. Why a lot of the people who were following this kind of artistic philosophy, this theory, this critical theory, if you will, they saw that Pollock was eliminating the two-step process, that he was going into automatism as he was painting. There was not a two-step process. It was all being done at once. And there was a comment in there that Pollock made about how the Native American sand painters worked in this way. And that they would paint, actually we used colored sand, and they would walk over, they would do all kinds of things. It was ritualistic. And you might say a lot of people have talked about Pollock's work as being a ritual. And one critic actually called that action painting, this and some others. So, time to call it a day. Any questions? Any comments? And you don't have to like all of this stuff, you know. But I want you to know about it. Because that's what education is. It's there. And as a matter of fact, you can't touch a Pollock painting for anything less than $100 million in this day. So just say, all right, well, you guys have a good weekend. I'm closing it up. And let's see. Yeah, see if I can do it. And meeting.